The Diet of the Realm of St. Stephen met for its regular session in early 1518. Matters of defense and financing of the same were pressing topics, as were the diplomatic appeals for and against the truce with the Sultan. The papal ambassador had been assuring the court in Buda that the preparations for a united crusading effort were underway and that no truce with the Sultan should be made. Regardless of this, the Estates of the Realm rejected the Sultan's offers, as a truce practically meant little. Raids would continue anyway, and there was no immediate danger of invasion, as it was rumored that Sultan Selim was still in the Middle East with a weakened army. Which wasn't true, but Selim had little interest in turning north in the near future anyway. Besides, many in the Diet thought that it might indeed be a better idea to face the Sultan on the field of battle, instead of suffering this continued deterioration on the border. For after all, the Hungarian nobility were naturally skilled warriors, heirs of the Scythians and of Attila. Of course they would defeat the Great Turk if he ever decided to stop cowering and properly invaded. They'd even attack him and beat him if only they were allowed to by the corrupt, treacherous cowards and foreigners around the crown. The minor nobility of the Diet demanded that if the Sultan would not come to them, that the fight be taken to him. They didn't care where, when, or with what means. They demanded action, and after all, the young king would certainly lead them to victory, like the young King Matthias from decades before. Never mind the fact that Matthias had been risk-averse and avoided facing the Sultan. Never mind the fact that Matthias's army had been disbanded and the economy that paid for it destroyed. Never mind the fact that all of the experienced commanders of Matthias's wars were dead, and that the current generation, for all their successes, did not have the same experience of large-scale war, nor had the means to deal even with raiding parties. It was not unusual for boastful minor nobles to make inflammatory statements at the Diet. They also tended to leave early for their own estates as they ran out of money, and wanted to make a big impact. So the royal councillors and magnates ignored them, and focused on administrative and financial matters that also favored them. But this time, almost the entire minor nobility abandoned the Diet in protest, proclaiming that they would gather again on their own initiative in the summer at Tolna, to the south of Buda. Sometimes, when the Diet met away from Buda, it was to gather for military campaign. Between the two Diets, the situation on the border deteriorated. The undersupplied and under-equipped fortress of Belgrade was put under siege. Many of its cannons had been taken by Voivod Janos Zapolya on his failed campaign into Serbia in 1515 and had not been replaced. But Belgrade held out. The fortress of Jajce was also put under siege again, and Ban Berislavić struggled to mount a relief effort, as the estates of Slavonia were refusing to finance the defense of anything outside of their territory. To remedy this, Berislavić had demanded to be appointed to the vacant bishopric of Zagreb, so that he could at least have access to the resources from one of the biggest landed estates in the Kingdom of Slavonia. But due to previous conflicts with Berislavić, the primate of the realm, Cardinal Bakac, had so arranged matters to ensure his nephew, Simon Erdodi, became the new bishop of Zagreb. Berislavić was thus forced to beg for aid from Emperor Maximilian von Habsburg, who had been expanding his influence among the Croatian estates by supplying and financing their defense, and through them the defense of Austria. The Diet of Tolna met in July, first only attended by representatives of the county nobility and the self-representing minor nobles, and when it became clear that this gathering mass of armed and angry nobles could not be ignored, the king, council, magnates, and prelates decided to join the Diet, retroactively making it an official and legal gathering. To calm tensions, the king dismissed Bishop St. Mari as chancellor on accusations of corruption, and replaced him with the royal treasurer Ladislav Šalkaj, the Bishop of Vach, who just happened to be St. Mari's protege. The Diet ordered that Ban Berislavić and our old friend Lawrence of Ilok were to be dispatched with supplies and money to relieve the fortress of Jajce, which was successful. It was also decided that the king would lead the assembled nobility on campaign to somewhere, to be decided later, as the Turks had withdrawn from Belgrade. Another Diet would be summoned at Bach in September, but that Diet would also not go on military campaign, due to lack of funds. The new chancellor was replaced at the treasury by two allegedly incompetent nobles, but I'm not sure their competence or lack thereof mattered, for it seems that most of the nobility could not grasp the full scope of the financial problem they were in. They wanted it resolved in a short period of time without radically changing the system. The treasury did what it could with consent of the Diet. Revenues were restored from mortgaged royal estates, the royal salt and silver monopolies were re-established, tariffs on cattle exports were raised, and a new round of emergency taxes implemented. The plan was to raise 2 million florins in 3 years. But the systemic problem was in tax collection. As taxes went up the chain, the nobles that collected them were allowed to take a portion of the revenues to cover their own military expenses. This system was of course ripe for abuse, and as the nobility and clergy were constitutionally exempt from taxes, according to the Bull of 1222, a disproportionate burden was placed on the only other entity that had substantial sums of money and could legally be taxed, and that was hated by the nobility that controlled the Diet, the free royal cities, who either refused to or couldn't pay the new higher taxes. Meaning that the money, instead of being concentrated in the royal treasury, was dispersed across the realm, and what did reach the treasury was insufficient to meet the increasing needs of the military and defensive systems, making the realm dependent on the goodwill of the nobility and foreign aid. The two treasurers were dismissed a year or two later, and replaced by the far more capable cleric Paul Varadai, but even he couldn't meet the demands and expectations of the estates that wanted the glory of King Matthias without having to pay for it. The Diets had also passed other laws and measures, but how much any of these were obeyed is up for debate, between selectively or not at all. As part of another round of diplomatic missions to ask for aid, the Croatian emissary Francis Tarquin Andreas addressed the Imperial Diet in Augsburg in 1518. He finished his speech by reprimanding the German estates for their infighting, their repugnant stubbornness, and their mercenary ways. It is well known that each of you would sooner part with your lives than with your stance. These years there hasn't been a war among Christians in which a German mercenary did not fight for gold. You refuse your fellow brothers in Christ, who have reached out their hands to you. Where is that fire, you Germans, to take up arms and fight for a common cause? At the same Diet in Augsburg, the papal legate Cardinal Thomas Cajetan was conducting the questioning of a German Augustinian preacher by the name of Martin Luther. Just a year before, he had caused quite a commotion among the German clergy and people with his public stance against the indulgence practices of the Holy Mother Church, and his attacks on the authority of his superiors, which had made him quite popular in discontent Germany. This popularity also spread some of his other questionable teachings to a wider audience. The arrogance and conviction with which Luther defended himself and refused to adapt his views to be more in line with the official accepted theology and authority meant that this interview in Augsburg turned into a theological brawl.